with the 2MK team. Today we are running a little shorter than usual. Our stream will only be 2 hours today, as will the lounge. Last time we were having a couple of problems with the connection somehow. Surfers were being a little weird, so we might see more of that this week. Hopefully not. With Evo coming up basically tomorrow. It's around that time of year where we change our focus and content a little bit more. And interestingly, that means you're going to see a little bit more effort put into specific things for this game. Now that most of us are decent at understanding what's happening, it's time to move on to making sure that what you want to happen in response to your understanding actually does. While this game is not one where you need to learn a lot of frame data for the most part, there are a few things to understand about advantage or not, similar to what we were discussing on our Dead of Our Lives stream last week. You're at least somewhat likely to see similar things in upcoming weeks, not this one. This week, if there is much talking done, it's definitely going to be primarily about vanishes and the movement toward tactics using assists and switches, as this is one of the main important things that needs to be perfected before one moves into things like understanding advantage and so on. After all, assists are often used to get advantage in this way, or to protect you after doing moves that lack advantage. But understanding exactly where you are in those respects matters quite a lot if you want to actually get anywhere. So, this week we will be watching our players try to deal with the many different situations that come up, trying to use their assists correctly. There's much less likely to be a lot of talking on the stream as a result, since it's going to be more so team members specifically talking about their experiences and thoughts on the matter in chat. And anything said will probably be explanation in a sense of helping a player or any player who happens to be watching but doesn't understand some concept. Therefore then, if you want to join us, this is a US East Coast lobby. Neither stays on, which basically means that if you win, you play more often, but you do still get booted off the main fight. While this is functionally beginner lobby, we really don't mind any level of skill in this game, especially with the lobby options. Therefore, feel free to join us in Circle Match Priority Lobby 02 in front of Kame House. You're looking for Willian, the red hit. The password is 2717. This information can be found usually in the stream title and on our Twitter 2_MK_FGC.
This should be a great fight!
There are 4 effectively more complex ways of using your assists and switches in order to get in on your opponent and play neutral in this game. They are based on the general concepts of footsies and fundamentals, but it may take a little extra translation to understand them fully in this game. Meaning I'm probably going to just repeat them a lot. The first thing to think about is, if you dash at your opponent, what are they expecting and what can they do? For many characters, dashing at the opponent means that the opponent uses some move to check the dash. If this move has a good forward hitbox, that is, it is very likely to come into contact with a dashing player. Your option is usually to block, but unless the move is unsafe, you haven't gained anything from this. Your opponent now has advantage and can put pressure on you. If the opponent does not have a good response for some reason, or they really expect that you're going to hit them with something by stopping short using an invincible move or similar, they may want to block, especially if your move is likely to be unsafe.
It's time to face your opponent.
And finally, there's the character who just has a good, relatively safe, or relatively long forward move that allows you to do this.
Get ready. Fight it out.
In the case of the first situation where your opponent has a lot of range, but the move they use is likely to miss you if you stop, You can get extra advantage by calling your assist at the right time so that they end up getting hit when they try their move, or in some cases, if you call your assist relatively late, remember that the game has changed so you can no longer call them in block stun. They act as a separate move. Basically, you did not need to make yourself open in any way, and therefore you ended up with some frame advantage. You dashed up, you blocked, you called your assist before your opponent could hit you because you stopped short and made sure they didn't hit you. And then you're good. This is also part of the rock, paper, scissors you'll be seeing in this quite soon, but in general, if you're thinking first order strategies only, if your opponent has good long buttons in front of them, dash up, call assist, and block, in that order. If your opponent has forward moving moves, particularly ones that leave them somehow advantaged or safe because they've hit at max range, but you could get those moves to whiff, such as Broly, you generally want similar things to happen. You go up, stop short, call the assist to cover your space, or to do the whiff punish for you depending on your character, and you're in the clear. Of course you need at least some way to make the opponent want to hit buttons, but there's a lot of reasons why this is effective. And finally, if your opponent is expecting all this, or they have one long button that they want to use to deal with the situation, but don't want to deal with your assist, your better option is dash up assist Dragon Rush. Sometimes, for some players or characters, you might actually want to do the relatively difficult call assist instant air Dragon Rush, which is not that hard in this game, honestly, compared to most things, but doing it with the assist timing is tricky. And of course it depends heavily on the assist. When it comes to switching, you have another option. When the opponent is likely to whiff, but the move that they will be using is slow, and doesn't necessarily go that far forward, you can use the switch itself instead of the assist. The opponent will whiff the attack, and then be hit by the opponent, then be hit by your character switching in, resolving your problem. This one, of course, requires much more confidence. You have to believe that your opponent has a reason to check your advances every time. But against certain characters, and you have to learn which ones, honestly. Against certain characters who do not have a good jump back into button to stop super dashes, this is an extremely effective tactic, as their main way of keeping people from getting to them is just to do this. You generally don't want to do this on those characters with the long, relatively faster buttons, because they will often miss, but also recover in time and not get hit by the super dash, which isn't necessarily in your favor as a situation. So I'm sure that I'll bring this up at some other point within the matches. But think of it as the easy way with your assist to open someone up and actually get close to them, as this game doesn't offer a whole ton of "hey, I'm in now" moves on a lot of characters. Many of them are quite easy to recognize that they're happening. And since a lot of them require going into the air, the trusty 2H, provided it hasn't somehow managed to go in the wrong direction altogether, is a good solution to a lot of ways of people trying to get in without assists, meaning that you do have to think about it. And since most of us are not in the mood for jumping and therefore starting an entire class of attacks that the opponent will not get hit by, ground dashing is one of your better options, especially if your assists do not cover the whole screen. Do remember that we have taught from the very beginning that if you can, 5H on a lot of characters is a good option here. If you can space it at max range without your opponent reacting. And we originally were teaching that you can use 5H or assist for some characters and 5H or switch for others, again, mostly depending on what button your opponent hits in order to stop you from hitting the 5H before you can reach them. But of course, this is quite heavily dependent on where your opponent tries to go when they see you dashing. So bear that in mind as you watch. Some people jump backward, some people jump forward, and some just don't do anything in particular. For those of you who are used to the Janken concept, the rock, paper, scissors concept from other fighting games, you can absolutely treat this the same way, and you can start to see how this affects you as a person and how you normally think. If we assume that dash up, block into assist is rock, dash up, block into switch is scissors, and dash up, strike, or bait is paper, in both cases you're just basically aiming to just straight up hit them regardless of whether or not you do it immediately or not. You can make these decisions before you even actually dash. You can also simulate what you think your opponent is going to guess, once again, before you actually dash. And if you've ever played rock, paper, scissors for a longish time, it becomes relatively easy to just get into the mindset, especially if you're at this level of play, where for the most part, while you won't be able to stop everything, the close range game is a different mindset altogether. You play automatically, or you play just differently. The part of your brain that is doing the work for the close range game isn't the one that has to worry about getting in neutral. One of the more interesting aspects of this is when your opponent chooses to super dash as a response to you approaching. Super dash is a weird option here because it loses to a lot of things. And the things that it does not necessarily lose to, it still doesn't necessarily do any damage to. So it's not really a strong option in this case at all. That said, if you commit too heavily to the dash, this becomes a problem. You do have to decide at some point, hey, my opponent is definitely going to do something other than super dash, therefore I can commit a little harder to the dash itself.
行くぞ。終わりだわ。邪魔だ。落ちろ。調子に乗るな。どうということはない。ビッグバン邪魔だ。落ちろ。どうということはない。行ったところで能力があるの奇策は分かるまい。タフな野郎だ。これがスーパーサイヤ人ブルーだ。よーく覚えておくんだな。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Mata 一匹。虫けらが死にに来たか。
初めから全力でかかってくるんだな。
It's all or nothing! Let's go!
この攻撃だ。
Up until now, we've covered the concept of using assists and scrambles. However, many people refer to scrambles and quick draw as basically the same concept. And in this case, that's what we're referring to. Dash up something in neutral. For most characters in this game counts as what we call a quick draw situation. The reason this is important is because you obviously only have a certain number of assists available and have to decide how to deal with this. Mainly this comes up in recognizing whether or not your bigger problem is getting hit because your opponent beats you in scrambles, or getting into trouble trying to get in because you can't open your opponent up. And that is itself something to pay attention to in the match to decide where to focus your assist usage. Another one of the heavier advantages of this, as just shown, is that depending on your assist, they move ahead of your own character during this interaction, meaning that even if you misspaced yourself or your opponent went for a particular move type, they might hit the assist character instead of your main character. Depending on what they do and which types of button they use to keep you out, this may mean that they're unable to do a proper follow-up because they can't necessarily cancel properly, if there was a cancel to be done. This is in fact one of the reasons why characters with long standing and crouching medium attacks, as well as those with lunging light auto combos, do such a good job of playing footsies in this form. They do 2 attacks in order to keep the opponent from getting close, and even when the opponent calls an assist, their second attack is still fast enough to land and possibly cause some problems. And if it doesn't and they actually get hit, it's usually not too devastating for them because they tend to be pressury characters. It's possible to build meter quite quickly in this game, meaning that overall, as you get better and better, you spend more time watching the assist meter than your actual meter. Most of us can keep track of whether or not it's at 0, and basically that mostly affects combos, so we're fine. The more you master your assists and switches in this game, the more your opponent has to think about. And the more your opponent has to think about, the harder it is for them to get anything done to you. Over the last year and a half of this game existing, it's taken the team a while to adapt to that concept of the extreme importance of these aspects of the fight itself in an otherwise relatively simple game. If this game did not have the system, in fact, it would probably not be considered to have enough depth to even play at a serious level. Most of the moves have a very clear priority as to who will be successful or not successful at doing particular things, and there are certain strategies that outright win. But choosing the right team, either the right team for you and learning to use their assists, or a team specifically built around using assists correctly, so to speak, influences this game heavily. Fortunately, once you're down to this aspect of it, where either character might simply lose as a result of not having enough health to take hit even when called as an assist, things get more complicated. When you're down to your last character, it's often important to take certain types of risks rather than trying to play defensively, as defensive play at that point requires a much higher ceiling of skill than normal. This is not specifically because you don't have a way to do this. After all, most of the time it's the same as if your assists were down. But in this case, it's more so that you don't have a plan afterward if the opponent decides to retreat, regroup, wait for their own assist to recharge, and try more or less the same mix-up again. It's basically the same as trying to play rock, paper, scissors with someone who is able to make sure you cannot pick scissors and basically always takes their time.
Are you ready?
クリリンさん。うい。戦いの感が鈍ってるな。クリリンさん、引退しても力は衰えていないな。僕も見習わなくちゃ。
Time to begin the match! Get ready! Fight!
この攻撃だ。やってみせる。頼みます。この攻撃だ。クリリンさん。これでもか。見切った。
Fantastic!
そのままだ。やるな。見切った。さあ間に合って。よし。どうした。そうだ。バカなはさないぞ。どうだ。これできやがれ。カメハメハ。何か。カメハメハだ。何の。どうだ。修行の成果を見せてやる。何の。どうだ。ビッグバンだ。どうだ。ここを見ている。ケツだ。ビッグバンだ。調子に乗るな。そこだ。来たまれ。点数をつけるとすれば。逃がさないぞ。やめるなよ。僕も加勢してない。さあ間に合って。こいつはハンデだ。ビッグバンだ。目玉だ。点数をつけ。許さんぞ。本気でいくぞ。これで終わりだ。 点数をつけるとすればそこだ。こんなものか。ビッグバントラックス。
やったぜ。へへ、ちょっとは様になったかな。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Are you
ready? Let's go!
邪魔だ。来い、あいつぞ。効かんぞ。リストベル。邪魔をする。この攻撃だ。やってみリストベル。どこへ行くんだ。
どうした
クズめ。
なんでやつだ。
なんなんだ。
登場ね。許さんぞ。貫いて回せるかしら。クリリンさん、そこで待てないわ。そこでこっち。兄ちゃん、負けない。こっち。
俺が殺してやろう。どこへ行くんだ。すぐに終わらせてやる。
生きた。この攻撃だ。
さて、お酒を鬼最後。
しまった。全力でいくぞ。
防げろい。砕け中。無駄だ。
許さんぞ。よっ。よし、行くぜ。
地球ごと消えてダメだ。そろそろ。
なんの
この程度か。
二度と吸収させてたまるか。俺は無天老師様の弟子なんだ。この程度のやつに負けてたまるか。
A fierce showdown is about to begin!
As Omni Rabbit just mentioned in stream chat, sometimes thinking about an option you have more often can help purely by making you more confident that you don't need to do something else immediately. In fact, a lot of the reason why players move to become more defensive as they get better at any given fighting game is not necessarily specifically wanting to play lame or believing that their opponent will make a mistake, but simply realizing that they don't need to put themselves in a situation to make a mistake just yet. In this game, where the assist meter recharges over time, this is particularly true. If you have been faced off with your opponent for a while with neither of you attacking each other, rather than feeling the sudden "I must do something or I'm never going to get anywhere," your mind slips back to the other side. If I wait a little longer before I do anything, I can do more. Or even just recognizing that your opponent might be expecting that, or focusing on your options or not necessarily focusing as hard as they should be, makes you able to decide with much more conviction, I'm taking the risk this time, I'm going in because I think I will manage it without the assist. But yes, overall, just thinking about the match differently as a result of thinking about your options means you can also expand the number of things your opponent has to think about and get things that you just saw with Omni Rabbit's jump over Kid Boo's instant air beam. Jump over is not something we do a lot in this game, but if you generally expect your opponent is going to react, "Oh, they're coming in from full screen, let me just use my zoning beam attack," you can just go entirely over it.
見ている。
どうした？
そこだ。ここを見ている。調子に乗るな。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。ここを見て。そこだ。来た。点数をつけるとすれば30点ってところだ。なめ逃がすか。なめるなよ。ここを見ている。ここを見ている。
Kanzuki Dynasty layering on the psychological nonsense there. Taking advantage of the fact that in sparking, your vanish attack does not have to actually become an attack immediately. Dropping things midway. In order to be confusing in the corner, and then after the sparking runs out, having had the opponent on guard for it so long, still doing more vanishes. Presumably because at that point the opponent thinks you're about to switch as a result of having done like 4 of them. The advantaged part of your vanish is over, but you still have an advantage, namely the fact that your opponent thinks it's over.
The battle's about to start. Good luck.
Buzz, お前から血祭りにあげてやる。
俺の怒りに比べたら貴様の怒りなどさまつなことだ。
Get ready.
終わりだ。終わりだ。調子に乗った
もう終わりか。
これが神の技だ。
人の牛のせても魔王するな。この程度か。じゃあ行くぞ。無駄だ。許さん。この程度か。この程度か。さてんぞ。なんだ。どこへ行くんだ。プレゼントだ。 よく頑張ったが、とうとう終わりの時が来たようだな。
This should be a great fight!
Urori! 生きていたのか。
Get ready! Fight it out! Counter!
僕も加勢します大丈夫か。登場ね。させない。そこ大丈夫か。
終わらせてやる。バーリ
負けないわよ。
頼みます。
よっ
行くぞ。黙れ。バーリ
各自は違うどうかしら。終わりじゃない。
遊びは終わりだ。
甘いか。
行くぞ。プレゼントだ。
なんて力だ。なんて力だ。行くぞ。黙れ。バーリ
もう終わりか。
仕方ないわね。逃がさないぞ。そこで僕もどうだ。各自は違うどっち。まだワンタッチだ。許さない。ちだ。それは
なんなんだ。いいだろう。私にバリエ
クリデンさん。
プレゼントだ。なんなんだ。
クリデンさん。
どこへ。
お願いします。
よしとした
おて兄ちゃん。
今楽にしてやる。すぐに終わらせてやる。
88号さんたちを狙ってるのか。
終わらせてやる。バーリ 誤算だったな。これで終わった。ありがとうみんな。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! Ready? Fight it out!
楽しませてくれよ。ベジータ様を失望させるなよ。ベジータ様を失望人を暴れしてやるか。強靭な肉体勝てるものなどいるものか。受けるがいい。受けるがいい。届くものが受けるがいい。神の怒りを味わえ。逃がさん。ここは譲ってやろう。小賢しい。人を暴れしてやるか。嘘だ。てめえらなんかがこのナッパ様にかなうわけがないんだ。
Nappa! Win!
スーパーサイヤ人ベジータの野郎見せつけやがって
Brace yourself for the coming battle! Are you ready? Fight it out!
俺が殺してやろう感情何なんだ行くぞ頼みます何なんだ
In some matches, one can make a decision as to whether or not to use your assistant switches in scrambles versus in neutral based on both the moves and the known behaviors and tendencies of the player. As a strong example, On Rabbit generally benefits more from using assists in scrambles against the Mara because of the tendency to defend in particular situations, but her characters having very strong options in the scramble situation relative to most. The ability to go through attacks, attack from relatively long range without putting themselves at much risk, and counter if one were to try to hit in the scramble, even thinking you had overall advantage and your opponent would have to block. Counter moves generally are quite quick in most games, including this one. And unlike the deflect, you directly get something out of it. Thereby using this suppression, makes it a lot easier to deal with this particular opponent type. Similarly, it's not as hard to get in on Broly or Jiren, at least some of the time. Both characters can hurt you very badly if they read your movement correctly, but it's not a matter of you being unable to get to them without putting yourself at huge risk. You always have at least the chance of getting through. Similarly, from Amara's side, she often wants to avoid using her assistant scrambles for more or less this reason. Defending her way through some of the ones called by Omni Rabbit is an easier way of dealing with a lot of the problems. And, similarly, since she has so much advantage, in situations where there is no assist to call, she can at least take the risk knowing that the opponent will either freak out and go for a relatively mashy or stronger move, which is often quite punishable, or just block, meaning it's easy to land the Dragon Rush even in the scramble situation. If it is teched, she also has advantage after teched Dragon Rush in most cases, and therefore doesn't need the assists in the scrambles as much. Meaning she can use hers to get in neutral, especially when Broly is on the scene and she does not want to fall back into a defensive stance and risk being pressed on by adult Gohan.
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Get ready! Let's go! Counter!
楽しめそう無駄だ もうさせてきた楽しめそうだくだらん雑魚だ山をそこに塗ってやろうそら覚悟しろ何なんだ
Jasmine is 100% that player we mentioned, who you have to catch by moving in for instant air dragon rush or similar. You can often commit to a bit more of a full approach against her, even if your assists don't cover your approach all that well. The opponent is more likely to move away, and even if she doesn't, a lot of times the instant air dragon rush doesn't really interact all that weirdly with even some grounded options. Whereas most of the counters to this move leave her quite vulnerable, let's say. Since her characters do not have the best solution to super dashes while in the air most of the time. It's also viable to use the dash up switch, especially if you're expecting a character like Nappa to try to counter you outright when you do approach. In this case, she uses her sparkling early not only to help Nappa recover, but also to quicken her assist recovery in order to keep control of the situation a bit better. Sometimes when you have this level of advantage, specifically that your opponent isn't too high on meter, and they've already lost one character, so they're less likely to be able to open you up, a defensive player can afford to use their sparking early because it changes the scenario from the opponent being able to kill a character in one combo back to them being able to do a large amount of damage. Especially if you are mid-screen or don't believe your opponent has too much offense with their current remaining team members, you can use this to set up a situation where you can play more defensively and buy time for characters to actually recover just in the back, rather than having the relatively constant risk of having them out without enough health to actually take a full combo or setup. The opponent then struggles quite a lot of the time to finish them off, and depending on their awareness, this can be a serious problem for them. Counting on the damage they're doing, and, for example, committing to a big attack for the kill, the way that sparking works sometimes means that that attack, when it otherwise would have killed, fails to do so somewhere in the combo, and she gets to fight another day.
そこね貫いてこんなところで
A lot of the time, keeping all three characters, especially in a high synergy team like this, is important enough to use your sparking early and then adopt a defensive stance if you've already gotten an advantage. Basically, hold your advantage rather than trying to use the sparking later, because if you're already winning and you expect this to continue, or at least even hope it continues, there's no real reason to expect that you'll ever get low enough to use the sparking in a desperate situation either.
The battle's about to start. Good luck. It's all or nothing. Fight it out.
この威力は甘い聞かせてもらう殺して
僕も加勢します
聞かんぞ見えている聞かせてもらう俺が殺してやろう聞かんぞその手つらい
クリリンさん
行くぞ終わりだわ
どうした
行くぞこの威力はこの威力は
ありがとうございます
聞かせてもらう行くぞ終わらせてやるバーリンクリリンさんマセイクマセイクやってみせるやってみせる茶番は終わりだ見えているこの攻撃だ来い聞かんな行くぞ
貴様の相手はこの僕だ
見えているわからん
戦いの感が鈍ってんな
Gohan, win.
大人になって一緒に戦うなんてなんだか不思議な感じですね
This should be a great fight! It's all or nothing! Let's go!
そろそろくらえかんか許さん出ろクズなんださてもう終わりだそろそろもう終わりかこがださて無駄だ
楽しめそうね。あっしまった。受けてみなさい。とどめ。削除はいい？まずおいで。終わりよ。削除はいい？なんですって。こんなことが。
もういい変われ。
すぐに終わらせてやるこの手さてさて何さてと何かカメハメハこの私にバリーをさてスピードには自信があるんだどうだそら覚悟しろ
楽しめそうね。痛いわね。
行くぞほらそら
痛いわね。
そう受け止める勇気があるかファイナル少しはやるようだな
こんなところで。
計算だけでわかるもんじゃない。俺たちサイヤ人はな。どうやら修行で差がつきすぎてしまったらしいな。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! Are you ready? Let's go!
これじゃ待て頼みますぞ。
行くぞ終わりだわやめろ落ちろ俺が殺してやろう そうなっていろ。なんだ。
まだまだ
この威力は。見えている。
任せてください。
こっちだ。頼む。行くぞ。
クリリンさん。
黒い。その程度か。邪魔だ。
そこか。
行くぞ。終わりだわ。行くぞ。
すみません。
うい
頼む。
クリリンさん
その威力は甘い。この威力は
ませんよ
俺が殺す。行くぞ。終わりだわ。黒い。落ちろ。
大丈夫か
その威力は
無惨状。
行くぞ。なんだ。
まだまだ
その程度か。
どうした。今度は俺が相手です。交代できますか。
逃がさないぞうっせぎゃーメハメハさあどうだなんだ甘いねどう
落ちろ。
どうだメハメハ
その程度。バカだ。
今オラの出番だ。
行くぞやっやっぞ参った
今度は俺が相手だ。
楽しめ。行くぞ。
今オラの出番だ。悟空さん、勉強させてもらいました。頼ってばかりはいられない。これからも俺のこの手で勝つんだ。
to face your opponent. Ready? Let's go!
スピードには自信があるんだ。死に損ないめ。さてとさてとさてさっさと攻めよ。もう終わりだ。
置けばかよ。
もうさてさて
仕方ないわね。
ここは握ってやろう。
終わりよ。そんなことが。
仕留め見えたぞ。
こっちよ。負けない。
さてだ
まだよ。終わりよ。
どうした。
まだよ。ちょっとっておき。貫いて。よ、ちょっとっておき。覚悟はいい？
あそこだろ。
こっちよ。まだよ。終わりよ。
見えたぞ。
負けないわよ。よ、ちょっと。まだよ。
見えたぞ。
負けないわよ。まだちょっと。
無駄だ。遊びは終わりだ。さてとさてさクズ行くぞ。魔王するな。行くぞ。ほらそれだ。行くぞ。相手が効かんでや。そら感情だ。
まだね。冗談じゃない。
無駄だ。
そんなはずはない。
はいこの程度だ。さて無駄だ。
置けばかよ。
この程度私せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。さて様ごときに
あんな雑魚をいたぶって楽しいか。
受けてみろ。カメさて受けてみろ。この私にバリアを
この程度か。あらそう受け止める勇気があるか。
この私にバリアを気が高まる。あふれる。 俺が殺してやろう。殺してやる。どうということはない。
加勢します。
孫悟空。なんだ。見えてる。仕掛けてもらう。俺が殺してやろう。何なんだ。聞かんぞ。
We're getting close to the end of this stream, as we are, as mentioned, stopping early this Thursday. Dora's Evo start, but we're probably likely to still have our Dead or Alive segment. We're unlikely to have any Guilty Gear content. Next week Monday will be probably the first time for a while that we're likely to miss our Mishmash and Battle Lounge. As by then, the new Street Fighter characters will have been released and we will either be doing bot work or the lounge will be more specifically the type we use for experimentation. This doesn't necessarily mean we won't be able to just join it, but the lounge won't be quite the same. More likely we'll have a password and you'll actually have to join it. Similar to these, where you actually come in from stream and you wouldn't be expecting the same sort of general players around. This is also going to be a free trial week for Street Fighter, meaning that we expect to see a lot more difficult oddnesses going on for either reasons of servers or of people joining lounges without actually being sure that they want to play the game in a particular way or seriously, leading to a lot of frustration either for them or us, depending really. But either way, assume that next week Monday content is more likely to be going through a bunch of stuff based on new bots or new bot concepts than anything related to actual standard Mishmash and Battle Lounge, though there may still, in fact, be lounges. Similarly, next week, Tuesday, we're unlikely to have a Tuesday train. We're more so expecting Wednesday content, not necessarily Standby Casuals, in fact probably Robotics Lab. Even more bot work, as releasing 3 characters at once puts a lot of strain on us in terms of developing all the bots as quickly as possible. But we're relatively prepared with some good plans for how to do at least Honda and Lucia. Poison is probably going to take quite a while longer, as most of our bots for zoning characters tend to. Lucia might also be super complicated given her flipper shot, but we'll see how that goes. We've thought this about various characters before. We should, however, be back to Kame House next week Thursday as normal, though it might again be shorter. And presumably, since it's unlikely that we'll get a lot done directly, it's better not to make any commitments toward next week Friday's content of any kind.
おめえはオラには勝てねえ。
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess. Are you ready? Fight!
なんなんだ。死ね。
食事の時間だ。
なんなんだ。
食事の時間。登場ね。終わりよ。おいで。許さないわ。
俺が殺してやろう。クズめ。行くぞ。もう終わりか。どこへ行くぞ。人を殺してやるか。バカめ。行くぞ。
仕方ないわね。
ザコが無駄だ。
覚悟はどうかしら。終わりじゃない。とっておき。よっはっ。まだよ。
貴様が相手。
終わりよ。そこで冗談じゃない。
行くぞ。どうだ。すぐに終わらせてやる。地球ごと消えてなくな。
楽しめそうね。
そろそろ。
まだよ。貫いてる。それ。
ない
まだよ。それ。よ。それ。負けない。そこで。こっち。
こいつはどうか。こいつはどうか。さて。地球ごと消えてなくなる。カメハメハでは諸君、ごきげんよう。
And Sal bids us all good night as well. This has been Rillian, along with T2MK. Good luck with your training, and enjoy Evo, everyone.